Good afternoon. Uh, my name is Pankaj, and I come from Mathura, which is the city next to the river Yamuna. And friends who've been in school with me tell me that the river each year is changing course, and each year local population makes lots of efforts to get the river back to God, and that's the problem. We have a Herculean task, what Dr. Khosla has set out to achieve with water for all. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, the Rajiv Foundation and Indian National Association, ICANN, and development alternatives for this. We'll begin the session with the presentation by Dr. Khosla, who needs no introduction, about the pressing need in India for providing water. We are not talking about drinking water. We should talking about now water is can be utilized. So it involves everything. We need water. We need water to drink. We need water for our fields. We need water for our agriculture. The trouble in India right now is that 55% of people are dependent on 17% of the GDP, which is our agricultural output. I can go on and on about what's wrong with agriculture, but about water,
Thank you, Pankaj. Because we're starting late, I'm going to dispense with the niceties. I'm really delighted to be here, and I see so many old friends who devoted a good part of their lives, professionally and otherwise, to the issues of resources in our country, particularly water. And what I'd like to share with you is some ideas which are sometimes counterintuitive, some of the ideas that we need to employ in order to bring the demand for water, which is rising inexorably, in line with the supply, which is rapidly coming down for various reasons. So we're going to talk, are we on there? We're going to talk about some solutions for drinking water, particularly in cities, some solutions for agricultural water, particularly in rural India, some solutions for industrial needs for water, because water comes from many different sources and is needed in many different uses. So I'm not only going to touch on a few of these connections, just to give you an idea of how many boats our country, our economy is missing in trying to get demand and supply to balance each other. So what I'm going to essentially share with you is a story, a journey about water, some of which we all know. Water for life, we know about drinking water and how difficult it has become, more and more difficult, both in cities and villages in our country. We need water for agriculture, and we know that is a major constraining factor in many parts of our country. And we need water for industry. Now these are the three areas that we always talk about. This is what Niti Aayog is worried about. This is what many NGOs are worried about, and quite rightly, they are the big issues. But in my opinion, there is one even bigger issue which underlies all these, and is both the result and the particular solution to these issues. And that is a kind of use which is not described in this pie chart. Pie chart shows that 70 to 80% of the water is used in agriculture, roughly 20-odd% is used in industry, and maybe 8 to 10% is used in domestic and other uses, for drinking, for washing, for whatever. But we always forget, this computer has a mind of its own, so bear with me. We always forget that water is actually the lifeblood of our ecosystem. It is the basis of life on Earth. It is, in fact, what I just said, the blood that goes through the veins of nature. And we never take care of the need to have enough water for nature so that it can go on supplying water for all our uses. And so when we talk about re-greening of India, I'd like to share my thoughts with you on this aspect more than the other one, so I will touch on it. We need water for fish, we need water for water treatment, waste treatment, we need water for balancing water cycles, in preserving our wetlands. We see water is actually the factory of nature for producing virtually everything we need. We need to protect our natural reservoirs. We need storm protection from mangroves. We need species and habitats for various kinds of biodiversity. We need water for ecotourism. We need water for recreation. We need water for aesthetic beauty. So we need to recall that not only do we need this drinking water, agricultural water, and industry water, which is the normal way of addressing this, but a much more important substrate, which is actually the basis of our being able to get whatever water we need. So what do? We've been basically growing inappropriate crops, water-intensive crops in dry, semi-dry areas. We've been poisoning our water sources with chemical pesticides and other agricultural toxic substances. We've been polluting our waters from industry. We've been running off all our agrochemicals and other things into our streams. We're dumping virtually everything we have into our rivers and nadis. And bad land use planning and bad land use is leading to all kinds of corrosion, erosion, and siltation, which destroys our surface and groundwater bodies. A large part of our country has been overtaken by alien species. You know about water hyacinth and Besharam and Ipomia. These are major threats both to the volume, quantity, and the quality of our water. And some of the stuff that we use, for example, cotton. You know, that t-shirt that you're wearing, it needs 40,000 liters of water per kilogram of finished product. Now, this is not to say we should go around naked, but we've got to figure out ways in which the extremely water-thirsty activities that we have. We drink water out of these plastic bottles. You know that 5 times as much water goes into making the bottle as there is in the bottle. So basically, there is a kind of a nonsense economy that is essentially drawing all the water that we need away. And then there are activities, some of you may know about a scheme that the government sort of tried, I don't know how far it's going to go, called Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. And there's several other ones. There's one between Bangalore and Mumbai, another one in the eastern part of the country. And there are supposed to be many of these. Now, this DMIC has been conceived to put 10 cities of 10 million people between Delhi and Mumbai, bringing in some 95 million people from Bihar and East UP to the areas of Gujarat and Rajasthan that appear to be underpopulated. Now, even their own report shows this map. It's a wonderful map because it's made by a satellite which measures the gravitational pull to determine where the groundwater is. And this is a map of the groundwater, and the redder it gets, the less groundwater there is. So this DMIC runs straight through the driest part of the whole country. There's no water there, there's no biomass there, virtually nothing, and we're going to put 10 cities of 10 million people each. It might have been better to bring jobs to Bihar and UP, which are much more fertile and have much better resource endowments. And then, we talk about some parts of India have drought, some parts of India have floods. Why don't we join them together? This is one of the most cockeyed ideas there is in resource management. I'm not going to go into it because we've had several years of discussions on these, but to tell you the truth, it is unlikely in the next 100 years that this will ever happen because of practical as well as theoretical, as well as other reasons, but mostly ecologically it won't work and economically it won't work. But we still talk about it, and every now and then some government statement says we need to join the surplus areas with the deficit areas. I have not come across anybody in the country who's willing to admit to being surplus, right? We may have floods, but the floods are there for other reasons, not because it's got surplus water. It's because we've got lousy drainage, we've built highways which prevent the water from flowing, and many other reasons. So basically, this idea, which is actually had a 100-year-old history, is one example of non sequiturs in policy. Now, the message that I would like to bring home more than any other is that what I've shown you just now shows that both the supply and the demand for water occur in other sectors. The policies of other sectors than water are the ones that determine the situation with water. Agriculture, industry, transport, highways, whatever. And what we need to understand is that we need policy coherence. In order to get the demand and supply of water to balance, you have to be able to deal with the ministers or ministries of all kinds of things. 8 or 10 ministries for sure, including the big ones that I mentioned. And one of them is trade. We don't realize it, but there was an article this morning actually showing that the amount of water that is exported in garments, embedded in garments from China to the US is so great that China is actually having a major part of its water deficit determined by that. And the purpose of that article was not about China. It was what will happen to the garment industry in the US when China runs out of water. So basically it was an American writer, so that's what I'm concerned with. This map shows you how horrendous virtual water imports by different countries are. And we have to be very careful when we export our water-intensive products, whether it's rice or cotton or whatever, or garments. We are actually exporting commodity this country has. The first most valuable, of course, is the brains, which we've already exported, so that's all gone. But basically, between the two of them, we've managed our best resources rather badly. So you all know about the ecological footprint. That can be translated into the carbon footprint, the water footprint, the material footprint. And if you look at these, you also realize very quickly that it becomes a boot print, because the people who get the benefits of water are actually the rich, and the ones who pay the costs of the water footprint are usually the very poor, and they are trodden under by the power systems of an economy. So one has to worry not only about running out of water, but who is going to run out of water first? And that's a very large part of our population, the ones who got left behind. And so the equity issue is almost as important as everything else I'm talking about. So water crisis is looming. Our water pressure sources are under pressure. Our population has quadrupled in the last century, and the use of water went up by a factor of 6. By 2050, we will have another 300 million people, each of whom will be using or wanting more water than today. And you can expect a huge growth of water demand. And if you look at the risk areas, the dark blue ones are the really risky ones, but India's figures pretty risky in terms of the threats of not having enough water. So this leads to increasing food security, it leads to potential migration, and if our neighbors, let us say Bangladesh, starts to have water problems, where are they going to go? And then, of course, it leads to failure of state governance and conflicts. So that means that it becomes a political issue. And why is it that we need water for all these things? Well, one of the reasons why we need domestic water, drinking water, is because without it, you can really have major disease outbreaks. That you have two kinds of diseases. One are water-washed diseases, where clean water is needed to basically have good hygiene. And then there are waterborne diseases, which basically do you in by, through vectors usually, through bad water. And then there are, of course, vector-borne diseases. So I give you all this essentially because it is an exceedingly complex set of issues. It needs good governance, and it needs a lot of cooperation between political boundaries, between states, between districts, and between nations. And it needs very different approaches to financing, economics, and so on. I've already tried to make a case for why the ecosystem plays such a role. Now, I would like to say that today's debate is passé. We talk about water as something that needs to be increased, augmented, more water storage, more watershed development, create more dams, clean up the rivers, rainwater harvesting, investing in women's education, and so on. These are the sort of ways in which we try to increase water availability. And the ones on the right, the blue ones, are ways in which we try to reduce the demand by reducing population growth, by self-reliance, by lowering risk factors, and so on. Now, these are okay. They need to be done, but they won't get us where we need to go by themselves. The debate needed today is a more holistic debate, a debate between social fairness, between the need of a healthy environment, and for a viable economy. And in order to do that, there are specific things that you need to do. You need to bring water consumption patterns under control. You need to find ways to reduce water use in production systems, both agriculture and industry. And you need to make sure that everyone gets the benefits of that. So it's a complex issue. It needs water, as I said, almost completely ignored by policies in the past for natural ecosystem services. That is a major missing link in all our policies. You need better technologies. We have wonderful engineers and scientists making big dams, major league space-age technologies, but they haven't been able to do anything for that little kid who can't even pull the pump because of his size. Our science and technology has left the basic needs questions out, and the most basic needs question, other than shelter, is, well, including shelter, is water. And now we are facing climate change. With climate change, the vulnerability index of these areas gets even worse. And our glaciers start melting, then our year-round supplies of water also disappear, because they are the ones that provide the buffer for the non-monsoon seasons. And then you start getting both floods and droughts, and basically everything goes to pieces. So the climate change issue is another area which is necessary to be dealt with if you're going to get your water systems right. So there are, 300, maybe 400 million people in our country who don't have clean drinking water. Every day they spend time like this, carrying it on their heads, and spend time early in the morning, fighting for a bucket of water. Can you imagine going to work after this? I mean, after having spent 2 hours trying to get one bucket of water. And whether it's out there in the village or in the city, it's pretty awful. The funny thing is that the poor actually pay more per liter of water than the rich. This is a diagram from the Asian Development Bank and the UN. It was published in The Economist, which is not a communist rag. It basically shows that the price that a poor person in a slum in Delhi is basically nearly 500 times what you and I pay for piped water. Of course, the price of piped water has gone up a little bit, so the factor may have come down, but it's horrendous. Whether it's in Mumbai or here, we're talking about major inequity in access to water because of the prices. Now, what is the way forward? So the rest of the few minutes I have left to share with you, I'm really now going to talk about how to decouple improving our well-being, improving our lives, improving our economy from the use of resources like water. How do we decouple these so that we can continue to have a good life, healthy life, good well-being, and yet reduce the amount of water? Well, one very important and probably fundamentally important way is counterintuitive in India. The rest of the world doesn't find it impossible, but in South Asia, how do we ration water? We turn it off. And by doing that, we actually major league massive problem of costs. This is an interesting diagram. This is all for the cities of India. This is the brown part is the amount of liters of water that are delivered to an average household. The average amount of water being brought to Delhi is 223 liters per day, per capita. 223 liters sounds like okay, but we still seem to be short of water. In Paris, which has 24/7 water under pressure in its taps, not 1 second do they actually close the water supply. They only have 151 liters. In Singapore, they're now aiming next year to be down at 143. We are talking about total waste of our water in our cities because of this intermittent supply. Because when you have intermittent supply, people waste a lot of water. When you have intermittent supply, you basically fill up all your buckets at 5 o'clock in the morning because that's when the water comes, or you have to have huge underground tanks and overhead tanks and pumps and boosters and this and that. And the capital investment and the operational investment is huge. The amount of capital investment privately in Delhi, I calculated, was more than by the municipality. And what happens? The original water pipes were laid 100 years ago. And when we decided to put in a sewage system, where would you put sewage lines? The easiest place was where the water lines were, on top of them. So when you stop your water, even if it's stopped for an hour, 2 hours, you're creating a vacuum which pulls in all the sewage into your water pipe. You know, in most countries, including developing countries like Brazil, it is a crime on the part of the water management system, crime, jailable crime, to have interrupted water. You have to then spend 2 days cleaning up the whole system before you can supply again. In India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Cambodia, these are countries that just basically came, I suppose, out of the mentality that when you want to ration something, you make it not available. And essentially, we are really facing an enormous amount of wastage, and this shows you the kind of wastage in supplying basically cholera at your doorstep. That's what you're really doing with intermittent supply of water. If people are confident, and of course it requires a certain amount of capital investment to go to a different regime with pressurized water for 24/7, but once you've done that, your costs come down dramatically. And it seems to me that one of the most important things that Indian cities can do is introduce this. And don't forget, it's not just the cost of water. It's also the coping costs. It's all those hours spent waiting in line for the bucket of water from the well. It's all those times that you had to come back without any. The coping costs. One girl told us in New Bombay, where they introduced 24/7 water, there are only 4 places that have introduced it so far, and that's one of them. This girl told us that her life had completely changed because now there were no more robberies. Because when they had to go out to get water, their houses were being plundered. So now they don't have to go because they're getting water in their homes, and and then there's the opportunity cost. And of course, health costs. So I take you to Singapore for just a minute because Singapore is an example of a very, very water-short economy. They are limited to 150 liters per day per person today. They're aiming in the next 2 years, I think, to 143. And they recycle 30% of their water already. And they're aiming for more than 100% in the sense that they will recycle it several times. And they have a very sophisticated system, and there's no reason why we couldn't either. It's not that expensive, and it pays for itself. One of the first things that we need to do, and that's why we're very happy to work with RGF and ICS, and with our other partners, Club of Rome, is that we need better data. We don't even know what's going on. This is called a Sankey's diagram. A Sankey diagram basically tells you where the resources come from and where they're utilized. And it essentially shows you all this. This one is for Metro Manila. In the last few months, my own colleagues have done this for 4 cities, Dehradun, Ujjain, Bhubaneswar, Jaipur. And these are reports that show precisely how much water each of these has, where it goes, and the Sankey's diagram essentially like this gives you a first handle on what we can do. Some of it we will be able to recycle, some of it we'll be able to purify, some of it we'll have to discard. And for each of them, this is for Bhubaneswar, this is for Dehradun, this is for Ujjain, we've already done a detailed analysis. And now it is possible to start doing some quite intelligent planning. And then, of course, there's all kinds of ways to reduce water use. It's called efficiency, with eco-machines of various types, local solutions. Now, you can augment water also by small dams. We call them check dams. My own organization has built more than 500 of these. In India now, there are more than 10,000 of them. And you can look at halophytes, like the Kazan rice in Goa, where you can grow plants that actually can flourish in saline waters. We have to invest in nature. Instead of destroying our countryside for making roads and buildings and parking lots, we really now have to recognize that if we're going to have water, or our children are going to have water to drink, then wetlands are very important, lakes are very important. We have to protect all our watersheds in a totally different way. And we have to restore our forests. Without them, you're going to have no chance. When I was young, as a graduate student, my professor and a couple of people from IIT Kanpur and myself, we developed a concept called the Ganga water machine. The Ganga water machine is simply a concept which is in hydrological books called ground and surface water, conjunctive use of ground and surface water. It's being used in the Imperial Valley in California. It's used all over the in Russia and neighboring states. It's in Canada. It's a very powerful way of using water and using the aquifer as your reservoir when in the lean season, and then pulling out the water. The energetics of it and the water systems of it are terrific. We tried to sell this to the government of India. We tried to sell it to the Minister of Agriculture at the time, and he threw us, my professor was an American, and he threw us both out saying, this is an American idea, we don't need that. This is the Ganga water machine. It's a very, very interesting concept which would work all over the Indo-Gangetic plain and could easily double the crops. So for a water-secure world, we need much more creative ideas of the type that I've just been talking about, and information of the type that we're trying to collect, infrastructure, which has to be built, and good governance. So I leave you with the thought that water needs a second thought. Thank you.
So that presentation leaves little to discuss and understand. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. I was just telling Dr. Khosla that if you just put some other field studies together, it could be a good PhD. So you will have your second doctorate. But the trouble with India is that when we talk about civic problems, my editor used to tell me in India Today, don't give us a civics lecture. If you are doing something on civil problems or civic problems. So let's talk about water as a weapon, and let's bomb Pakistan with water, which is already started. So unless something big happens about water, we don't wake up. Stopping or threatening to stop water supply to Pakistan, which is under a global treaty, is one such step. And in the future, I think more and more countries are going to use that instead of F-16s and Rafales. It's that potent. SYL canal, right now Tamil Nadu and Karnataka at each other's throats, all over water. There are right now at least 24 water conflicts between states in India, which are in either different courts or arbitration, this thing. In Delhi, today I read that 155 water bodies have been stolen by builders, and this is only in Delhi. In Delhi, there are 11,000 water tankers on the streets every day, using thousands and thousands of liters of diesel, which is imported, to ferry water from one place to another. So the problem of a systematic failure in water dissemination, that's I think our biggest problem. So do you think we have to take now water away from policymakers? Because you've tried your best to convince people in Niti Aayog and earlier Planning Commission in the government. What is the way forward? Is small the way forward, or big is the way forward?
In the case of this water, urban water, almost everything in India, whether it's growing rice in water deficient areas, whether it's from sugar cane in the wrong areas, whether it's having no continuous water supply, there are vested interests at work, very powerful ones. The people who The people who are against a rational outcome are the ones who own those 11,000 trucks.
Yeah.
And they happen to be politicians, by and large, actually. So they are not only have a vested interest, but they have the power to enforce that vested interest. So the answer, I think, in India is the small is the only way out. The community, the small, the decentralized. Even there, the small-time politician can be as venal as the big politician. One doesn't have to assume goodness in everybody's heart to do this. But it is within the purview of the local population, and transparency disappears when you get out of range. So I think a large part of it, that's why our check dams are so successful. That is why the decentralized approaches are probably, I don't know of very many dams. Mr. Tyagi is here, and he may, Paritosh Tyagiji can contradict me, but there are not many dams, big dams in the world that have actually produced overall, over a lifetime, a positive outcome in economic terms. And, our little dams seem to produce 400, 500% returns on investment every year. So there is a difference in approach. You don't tie up your capital for decades. We need to look at this. But the people who make decisions are the ones who are going to benefit from big dams,
big dams
projects, the big. And so that is really one of the big problems.
Yeah, because these days, whenever I hear the word scalable, I start frowning. Because the bigger we are becoming and the more we are scaling up, the more problems we are facing. These days, 1 billion of water bottles are sold and bought in the world in a day. 1 billion. And you can imagine the kind of damage it's doing to the environment and this thing. I was recently, last week only, I was at Harvard India conference, and I realized that who are the money bags and who are the poor liberal people. Because the poor liberal people were carrying these bottles, and the money bags were carrying their water bottles which they got in their hotels. So we have to change. It's a very simple thing. They give you a bottle as you check in, and you keep this bottle throughout the 5 days you are there. And you fill it at any fountain, and you use it. Very simple. And it's a huge industry. Yeah. Now try fighting with, there are 80 kinds of water, bottled water available now at Tesco in London. 80 kinds of different kind of waters. Some is from Catalan, which has some salt in it. Some is from some spring somewhere in France. And they've not started Ganga water yet. I think there's opportunity there, if it's potable. So, big business is we have to look at, and this whole thing of big problems or big challenges have bigger answers in terms of scale. I think that's not worked. Even Yangtze, you're talking about dams. Look at Yangtze, what it's done. It's basically killed a very good waterway because of that huge dam. We are going the same way. We are making waterways now everywhere in India, and we are pushing that thing. Second thing is about the different administrative wings of the government doing damage. The DIPP would like to increase its exports. So what do? They pick up the lowest hanging fruit, and in this case, that is sugar, cotton, and rice, which we start exporting and pushing the export of these by giving subsidies to the farmers. The farmer never gets subsidies. Farmers are on the streets. They're not getting enough money. But the export of sugar of India last year in 2018 actually decided the price of sugar globally. We exported so much sugar. This was the first time in the history of the world that India exported more sugar than Brazil. This kind of policy, which is a conflict between two arms of the government. One is your trade ministry and one is your environment ministry. How do we resolve this?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it has to be Any resolution in any structure, any system, has to be at a higher level than the components which need to be resolved. And that means that you need, at the highest level, people who understand that major exports of rice, sugar, and cotton is a major export of water.
Water. We are exporting water which is scarce in
and,
India.
and the economists haven't really explained to them that this is a huge cost. So that is an externality. That's gone. There's no accounting for it. And so it ends up by being hugely underpriced and therefore obviously competitive.
Yeah. And another thing is about, when we talk about big business, is the RO industry. An RO machine wastes 3 to 8 liters of water in reverse osmosis to create 1 liter of water. And none of us, we are not even aware of the kind of damage it's doing to water, a very, very scarce resource. So in that it happens, and RO has become a very big industry in India, and some of our parliamentarians are involved in that, and they're brand ambassadors of RO machines. So do you think in this case a coercive government policy would help? High taxation of RO machines and stuff like that?
Taxation is not coercion. And I think taxation would be very helpful. I think regulation also to some extent is needed. But basically, getting the price right is the only way. And making sure that the prices are right is when you take account of the cost to nature, the cost to the poor,
yes,
so on, and you put them into your thing. So I wouldn't call that coercive. I would call it good economics. It's basically getting the price right.
Yeah, because each time the tax is increased on something which is a commodity or a service, something to do with people at large, there are huge lobbies will talk about it, that this is going to create the RO machine very expensive and all that. So that's why I say it's coercive, because that's the other argument. Now, when you talked about local, by the way, you can tweet this and all that. This is all live, and whatever Dr. Khosla was saying.
Maybe they can also.
And they will ask the questions, yeah. So I just wanted to ask, what are the questions you have? And please go one by one, raise your hand and introduce yourself. Sir.
Yeah, hello. My name is Vikram Sethi. We've done quite a bit of talking and discussion together. So one thing I think that, Ashok, that you left out is that there's something called the Safe Water Mission of the Government of India. And they find, which is usually an underestimate, that 70% of our water sources or more, surface and groundwater, are already terminally polluted. Now, let's say it's 75%. I think one issue which you need to address when you're talking solutions is what sources are left and how important they are to safeguard for quality. Because otherwise, all these sources, you will have to use RO, you'll have to use some other mechanism, which are all terrible things. Because every time you use technology, you do not know where the waste is going. RO also has waste. It's not just water it wastes. There's all those chemicals which you're getting rid of RO. Where are they going? We have no idea. In the Yamuna is so full of chemicals come from medicines, somebody was talking about it, that it's overshooting. Antibiotics have gone haywire in that water supply. So I just wanted to say, I think you need to understand whatever sources we have, you have to safeguard them with your life. And if later on, as things proceed, I might tell you how you might do that. But I take issue with some of the things, Ashok, you've been saying. Singapore recycles water even to use in the kitchen. And if you recycle water, secondary, primary, secondary, tertiary, the cost of recycling water is probably 10 times what water sells in Delhi. Okay, the highest slab in Delhi. It's just not great. It works for Singapore. It's a rich small little island based on business. It cannot work in India. Actually, it goes against what you were saying. It is not natural infrastructure. You're actually doing this. So you have to find another way, and they don't do it anyway, because let me assure you that the few people I talk to from the Rhine, the Hudson, or the Thames, nobody drinks Rhine water. It's been 20 years since the Rhine has been declared now a river where you can swim and do. They do huge treatment in Amsterdam to actually pass the water through the dunes, pass it through all kinds of vegetation after doing an RO to bring it back to mineral water quality. So there are some things which are on, there are some things which are not, right? And I think we can take up issues as we go along. I think there was one more thing I wanted to say, but I don't remember right now. But I think the important thing to realize is that you have to get back to nature, because if you're going to actually restore the damage that has been done in the last 60 years, could be even from things like the Green Revolution, it's going to take at least 60 years to get these water supply back. And you show that graph which we showed at your conference about 10 years ago on the GRACE satellite. Actually, the situation is much worse than what that graph says. And to get that water back slowly is going to be a huge task. The point is that will we be able to restore the quality? I doubt it. I think we need to really talk about that. Otherwise, it's going to be hard. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. One more question.
I am R.K. Khanna, former Chief Engineer, Central Water Commission. Just with my little experience in the water sector in CWC for around 40 years, I'd like to mention a few constraints why we have not been able to make much headway in sustainable water development in the country. I joined CWC in 1975 as a young assistant director, and I heard of one Kishau Dam. Even today, after 10 years of my retirement, Kishau Dam is still on the paper. So why are the reasons? Number one, few points I will mention very quickly. There is no empowered coordinating mechanism in water sector in India. As Dr. Khosla said, about 8 or 10 departments and ministries are dealing with water. But there is no ministry which can say, okay, I am the custodian. Ministry of Water Resources is supposed to be the custodian of water, but they are not backed by any acts or legislations. Unlike the Ministry of Environment, so whatever they say, that is advisory. If the states suits the state, they follow it, otherwise they ignore it. Then the national water policy brought out by the ministry and modified a few times. That is also, even the World Bank has stated, that is a very well thought out document, but not backed by enabling legislations. Same problem. And offshoot of water policy, I would say, we are neglecting gender issues in the water, which are very important. There is not even a mention of a single word in the national water policy. At my instance, one passing reference was made in 2002. In 2012, even that has been deleted. So we are not paying even lip service to gender issues. Next is the low water pricing. We all know water pricing is very, very low, whether irrigation or domestic water supply. So there is no incentive for saving and no penalty for wastage. Last but not the least, I feel there is total lack of awareness on the scarcity value of water. We are totally oblivious of the environment and water in the country. I am talking about the water conservation here. I am sure tap must be running in my own home. And when I ask my wife, she would say, वो जी मेड ने खुला छोड़ दिया, plain language. मेड ने टैप खुला छोड़ दिया है. Tell my wife, why don't you ask the maid? कि नल बंद करो. नहीं. Maid कल से भाग जाएगी. I have to look after a household. You are spending your time in the conferences and seminars. I have to manage the house. So maid is more important than the water. That is the state of affairs towards our awareness in water and environment. And we belong to a land where we have been worshipping all 5 elements of nature as gods. We treated rivers as mothers. We used to say in the childhood, Ganga Maiya, Yamuna Maiya. Today we are westernized. We say the Ganges. We used to say, Jamna ji, let us go to Jamna ji and take a bath. That awareness has been lost, and we are moving towards a fast materialistic world, consuming all our resources at a very fast speed, so that not much will be left for the younger generations. So a very important issue is to create awareness in the people about the environment and the water conservation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. That's very kind and very thoughtful of you. One more question I'll ask here, and we are going to work on this thing. It's about regeneration we're talking about. Now there are enough projects which have worked in different parts of India, and we as an organization, we are going to do a whole series on them, like in Bundelkhand, in Dindori in Bihar, and these are really water scarce area, and the disease level of fluorosis and all kind of waterborne diseases is the highest in these areas, and they are the poorest areas. If you look at Chhattisgarh, okay, they are the places where even our immunization has not reached. The government, entire polio and measles and rubella immunizations, it's not reached, and that's why they are the worst affected. How to finance these modules? So if you got like 6 states, we have decided to do it on 6 states, so get 6 modules, but how to spread them, and who should be spreading them? Non-profits, government, non-profits plus government, or international agencies? What is the model for India? What should be the template?
Public health is a government responsibility. Deep down, it is an individual household responsibility, and it's a government responsibility. Doesn't mean that the government has the machinery to actually deliver it, but it is responsible in the sense of causing it to be done. Ye government banayegi nahi, par banwaegi. It has to be a banana situation, not a banwana situation, not a banana situation. So the issue is civil society, which government is nowadays a little bit jaundiced about, is a very inexpensive way of reaching large numbers in remote areas. Because there are enough crazy people in this world who are willing to do a lot for very little, and great inconvenience to themselves. Go out there and work with people because they feel that this is what their lives are fulfilled by. So their motivation is different from getting a salary and a salary increment every year. Their motivation is to get things done, and they're willing to pay a pretty solid cost in terms of reduced remuneration and so on. So the government can actually, for service delivery, make full use of this incredible energy that this country has, probably more than any other country I know, of voluntarism. And so it's really a partnership in which the government has to mobilize certain resources. They've got to produce the vaccines. They've got to make sure there's a cold chain. They've got to make sure that it is delivered by doctors who are paid. But then a lot of the real local stuff, mobilization, getting people in, bringing them together, which is very costly to have government officials do that. So this is a typical example of kaun banayega or kaun banwayega. And I think we've got to count on a partnership of this type to get it done.
Okay. So international institutions, not non-profits, government together, because this is the kind of 160 million people have no access to any kind of water within their 2 kilometer or 3 kilometer radius. I mean that's the government data. And on the other hand, we have free Wi-Fi in every railway station now. No one talks about there is free water or drinking water on railway stations. The railway ministry, which is giving free Wi-Fi on railway stations, is charging money for water. So this whole priority has to be set right,
yes.
Number one. Number two, we have to stop people who are making, as you pointed out, making capital and profits out of water. Can we declare water as a national asset.
Yes, but we means politicians have been forced by the voters.
Local government, regional government, central government.
Media, you, me, everybody has to now
Media has no time. We are having a war with Pakistan. Now, what is water? I mean,
Well, this is what we got to address. We got to mobilize enough voice that government cannot ignore it.
good. That's good. Thank you. There are a lot of journalists I see. I go hand going up.
Hi, my name is Vipul Mudgal. I work for an organization called Common Cause. Very good discussion, sir, but very depressing. I mean, is everything so gloomy? I mean, one hears some stories about system of rice intensification, crop intensification, some good story from a slum in Chennai. Are there any good stories for you? Do you see anything good that we are doing? Or is it all kind of depressing, gloomy?
No, I thought I covered some of the good ones. And you need to know what the problem is that you're dealing with, which is a fairly systemic, connected and rather complex problem. So it takes a little while to explain that. But all the things that you said, you mentioned just now, and many, many more. My own organization does a huge amount of work all over northern India, particularly in Bundelkhand. And we've had a huge impact. So that's not what was intended. The intention is that, is it enough? Is it getting us to a stage where we are catching up with the problem and exceeding the speed at which it needs to be solved? And I don't think we are. I think there are wonderful initiatives, but how many of them have been actually replicated on a large enough scale to make a sizable difference? If you're talking about the thousands or the lakhs, you're talking about a self, how would you say, congratulatory thing. If you're talking about the millions, because the numbers are in the hundreds of millions, then I think one should say, wow, we've got all these solutions. Those solutions are no good unless they start multiplying. And not many of them have multiplied. So there are plenty. I'm in that business. I know how many good stories there are. But how many of them got beyond the village or beyond the district? Not many. And that's what we're concerned about.
So this replication of successful models, I think that's what's very important. And that's why we've taken up this issue. In the media, we are going to do 12 states, 12 models which are replicable in at least in those geographies which can sustain that. And it's important. And I'm not doing it, other people are doing it. There are non-profits involved, there's water aid involved, ministries involved. But I think we can do it. And we have not reached that critical mass yet, people. Once we reach that, then we say it's a success story. Outside Lodi Garden, if you go for a walk, someone has talked about the government's initiative. There's this whole Swachh Bharat thing and water this thing. There's a machine there and it is locked. This is in Delhi. Just a walk away from here. I go there for a walk and I realized that the machine ran for 1 month and then now it's locked. So I asked the guy, what's going on here? The sab kabhi pani aata hai, kabhi nahi aata hai. And this is happening in Delhi. This is NDMC. This is the per capita consumption of water. We are talking about 150 for Singapore. Is more than 1,000 liters in Lutyens, Delhi. And that's because of all the lawns people have in their 1 acre plots. 1,000 acres. Okay? And all we need basically is 100 liters a person. That's global this thing. So there's not enough a critical mass enough. I see a hand going there, but yeah, sir.
सर आपने अभी थोड़ी देर पहले बताया कि जल को हम नेशनल एसेट बनाएं। मेरा ये मानना है कि उससे पहले यह देश इरिगेशन वाटर या वाटर इंडस्ट्री वाटर को इकोनॉमिक गुड के रूप में डिफाइन करे। हमें यह तय करना पड़ेगा कि वाटर रिसोर्स इस कंट्री में इट इज़ एन इकोनॉमिक गुड, नंबर 1। ये मेरा एक सजेशन। जो पहला क्वेश्चन जिस पे डॉक्टर खोसला साहब ने प्रेजेंटेशन दी, इफेक्ट ऑफ क्लाइमेट चेंज, व्हाट आर प्रोस्पेक्ट्स ऑफ इंश्योरिंग वाटर टू ऑल, ये प्रश्न हम डिबेट कर रहे हैं। इस पे कुछ एक आंसर मैं करने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ, पूरी विनम्रता से पूरे हाउस को साथ में लेते हुए। ये प्रॉब्लम बहुत बड़ा है, तो हमें इसका बड़ा सॉल्यूशन ढूंढना पड़ेगा, वो सॉल्यूशन जो अब से 50 साल बाद तक कारगर हो। तो हमें वो बर्तन और वो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर बनाने होंगे लैंडस्केप पे, जिससे सबको पानी मिल सके। मतलब बहुत बड़ा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, चाहे उसकी जो कीमत इन्वेस्टमेंट चुकानी पड़े, और जो इंटरलिंकिंग ऑफ रिवर का काम है, जो विगत 1972 से डॉक्टर के.एल. राव के समय से कहानी चली आ रही है, अप टू 2014 सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने जब तक कहा है, इसे हमें करना जरूर शुरू कर देना चाहिए। अदरवाइज न सबको पानी मिल पाएगा अब से 10 साल बाद, न हर खेत को सिंचाई के लिए पानी मिल जाएगा। धन्यवाद।
Thank you. I think that's very important. You're right. I mean, we have to start taking it as at the level of a war with Pakistan, or at least if not war with Pakistan, at it's polio eradication. I think at that level, that that we need to get this out. Young man. Last question. After that, one more question.
Sir, I am Rohit. I am a Supreme Court advocate. So my question is very short. That as per the National Forest Policy 1988, the state is supposed to maintain 33% of forest cover. But what is happening is the forest cover is reducing day by day. And because of that, the rainfall is going down. So the atmospheric water content will also go down. We are talking about how to clean the rivers, how to restore our aquifer. But I think the focus is not on from where our future water resources will come. And I think we should talk about how we have to save the precipitation in the future. Do you think that any immediate policy level changes required in this? Very short answer.
Well, one of my most important slides was on the need for forest restoration. And that isn't something that is done just by itself. You have to have all the other sectors involved, the water sectors, the agriculture sectors. Forests under great threat because they're being denuded for many different reasons, mostly for human settlements and roads and varieties of human activities, and those will have to be traded off. So having a policy saying 33% is meaningless unless you show what you're willing to sacrifice for it, what are you willing to pay for it. And that hasn't been done in our policies very well. And actually, we're really in very bad shape on that front. And a large part of the water problem comes from that.
Please, you go ahead.
I think I'll be loud enough otherwise also. My name is Dr. Pachauri and I represent IP University. I'm teaching there. Yeah, sure. My name is Dr. Diksha Katyal and I'm teaching in IP University. Somehow I feel that the role of academia has been undermined in the research that is being carried out in water, plus the way we can play a role in development of resources. Now, why I'm saying this is I'm myself an Erasmus Mundus Fellow, and from companies like ACOM till Deltares till Dutch companies, we give consultation regarding what the current resources of water are, what is their current state. But when it comes to agencies, government funding agencies, when we write a project to them, they say that this work has already been done. And then when we ask them to give us the data, they rather come up with excuses like, no, we don't have this kind of data. So that is very contradictory in nature. On one hand, they say they do not have data, and on the other time, they say that this work has already been performed. Now, somehow I feel that if universities are linked with CSR initiatives of the company, because whatever research we do is not very favorable to companies all the time. So companies do not prefer to sponsor us or they take interest in our research. So personally, I have this feeling that if under CSR initiatives, if association with universities becomes mandatory, then the funding that we receive shall increase, and then our involvement, because as you know, world over, it is the universities which are working at large onto these issues, shall be done with. What are your viewpoints onto this?
I can't agree with you more. You're absolutely right. The way CSR is constructed right now, I don't know of a single rupee that has gone into research. In fact, I'm not even sure it's allowed to go into research. So we have to work at the policy level with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and describe to them that the payoffs are huge of having better data, having better analytical models, that their objectives of improving the lives of people are going to be much more easily and more scalably met. And we need to work together with the universities to try and get that in there. There's a list of about 10 or 11 items that CSR is eligible for. The word research figures in them, but I haven't seen any activity in that area.
One last question, sir.
Thank you. My name is
We can hear you.
Tanmay Chakrabarti. I represent Tata Sons. I look after the group government affairs. My submission to you, sir, is that you are talking about water for all, and we've been soft peddling water for the last 70 years, and we are yet to reach many millions. What are your thoughts on creating a right to arable water and right to potable water as a citizen right, which is pushed from legislation down onto penalties to administration for not having to fulfill that right for the citizen? If we have a right to education for every Indian, why can't we have a right to potable and arable water for every citizen? Because I think we can keep on discussing till the cows come home, and there will be issues and problems, but unless I think we are pushed through legislation, and which is where the media should also play a very important role, rather than simply pursuing TRP ratings and talking about the Pakistan war. If we do not legislate and bring that right to the citizen to be having access to clean drinking water and the agricultural fields to having enough water for agriculture, I doubt whether in the next 70 years we will be again coming back to this forum and discussing the same session. My second submission to you, sir, is in all the discussions, why are we ignoring that 2/3 of our land mass is covered with sea, and where is the desalination initiatives that can also greatly compensate for the denuding of the rivers that we keep desecrating over the decades that we have? And why is that not a discussion item in India when we have this kind of an asset all around us? In fact, 2/3 of our borders have seas. So these are my two submissions to you, sir.
Well, I couldn't agree.
Right to water, I think, we had the whole structure of right-based legislations and
Water is a right. Water, I don't think
we had
any
right
government.
to food, we had right to education, right to food we had already.
But what he's saying is that it's not enforced as a right by associating penalties for non-performance by government. And that's true. There isn't any penalty if they don't make sure you get water. But I agree entirely with you. The only thing is that we sit in these forums and we say government should. Now, government isn't going to. It's shown for 70 years it's not going to unless we force it to. So it's not a question of government should. We should persuade government. And I think we tend in India to forget that the government is the one we elected, and we try to influence. Now, you come from a very large and very, very well-endowed corporation, and corporates have much more influence on government policy than most of us. And if we could join together, we could probably persuade them to do this. But, it takes just one or two focused movements, mini movements, a few people who get together and say this is a right. Water is a right under the Constitution. So is the environment. So is food. So is education now. But the legislation needed to make that enforceable doesn't exist. So you're absolutely right. We should make sure that all our MPs, all our representatives in Parliament are going to do this. But it's no good saying, why doesn't government? Because we didn't force it to. So it's our job. That's one of the reasons why we have these kinds of seminars over and over again. You know, in the last 3 days, there have been at least 4 or 5 workshops, seminars, colloquiums, and conferences on water right here in the city. So we talk a lot, and we go from one to the next, but it always turns out we ask, why doesn't government do this? Or government should do this. And frankly, I think those 2 phrases should be taken out of our vocabulary. Government will do what we make it do. And we've got to get together and force them with the power of logic and the power of persuasion and the power of the vote, and in some cases with the power of what makes the economy work. We need to do that. I would beg for the rest of the afternoon for us not to say, why doesn't government do this or that? Because that is begging the question. Government is not going to, government didn't on its own legislate gender equality, did not on its own. Everything comes ultimately from civil society, academic, media pressure. And we just got to figure out ways to do that.
One big right was right to information, and it came after a very long struggle and a huge media focus. So media focus comes back again to that, that's we disseminate information, people should know what are their rights. Tell you the truth, I didn't know that in Constitution there's something about water.
It's not specifically water, but the basic human rights are the
basic human rights as part of the human rights. Now in the city of, our problem right now is that we want to be a Scandinavian country with South Sudan infrastructure and resources. That's India's problem right now. No, we've done some research on this. You are talking about research. Whenever you go and do research on something, you find out there's very hardly a good research paper which is from 1980s, if not earlier. Because we don't have that research, we have capabilities, we have a lot of talent, but there's not enough money in research. That's why you can't get people doing PhDs on research on this. So we can, the city of Helsinki is very good. I just go back to that. There's right to Wi-Fi. It was the first city which has a right to Wi-Fi. And that is, this is legislation enforced by the local governments. So your school has a responsibility to give the students Wi-Fi. If you are in a public park, the local municipality has to provide that Wi-Fi. And unless we do it in Indian, we have now Gram Panchayat, we have to do that. And if we can't have enough research, we can go to research which people have done about 400, 500 years ago. Rahim Khan Khana, Rahman Pani Rakhiye, Bin Pani Sab Soon. इससे ज़्यादा रिसर्च आपको क्या चाहिए? पानी गए ना उबरे मोती मानस चून. So you don't have the pulse, you don't have people. We talked about health and how it impacts health, and chun is your food. 3 things. I mean, we don't need more research after this, but we need effort and we need commitment and we need determination. And I think by the end of the evening we'll have enough of those. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Dr. Khosla. Thank you very much for your wonderful